Welcome, folks. We'll get started here in a few moments. Thanks for joining. Again, thanks for joining, folks. We're going to give it about another minute, and then we'll kick it off. All right, we'll get started here. Thank you to everyone for joining. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding the nuances of credit card processing fees. We'll be discussing some of the, the finer points of how the system works and what fees are charged. The goal is really to help you as accounting professionals, help your law firm clients better understand kind of how the system works, and ultimately help them reduce those fees and costs associated with accepting electronic payments. So big special thanks to our partner Lien Law for helping put this on today. Lien Law is a billing, accounting, and practice management system that's built directly on QuickBooks. And you can now send trust requests, electronic trust requests directly from Lien Law by connecting your Gravity Legal account to Lien Law. It's exciting. And then also a shout out to our blog and podcast, Financially Legal. Financially Legal is where we dive into all the finance, economics, and finance and economics of the business of law. We've got articles, episodes, financial calculators, and a bunch of other content on there. I'll put the link directly to Financially Legal in the chat here in a moment. But you can also get there by going to gravity-legal.com. Today's meeting for and feel free to write any questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer them in line. If we can't answer them directly during the presentation, we'll try to have some time at the end to get to some of those and any others that come up at that point. So. Today, I'm excited to announce our speaker, Ashley Blasky. She's a business and financial analyst at Gravity Payments and has been working in the payments industry for over 5 years. And she has looked at and analyzed thousands of credit card processing statements. So she knows all the tricks, all the fees, all the nuances. And all the ways, unfortunately, our industry tries to obfuscate and in some cases take advantage of the businesses who accept credit cards. So on that incredibly positive note, I'll turn it over to her and I'll disappear, but might come back to interject some questions here and there. So thanks, Ashley.
Perfect. Thank you, Emery. I appreciate it. Yeah, Emery's going to be monitoring our chat today. So if you have questions about anything that we're talking about, he has full permission to interrupt me and kind of continue the conversation with whatever's important to you to talk about today. So I'm excited about that. Again, my name is Ashley. I've been here at Gravity for over 5 years at this point, and the majority of what I do is look at credit card statements and try to understand, like Emery was saying, the nuances of all of the fees and how those get broken down and charged then to our different accounts. That said, the credit card industry is incredibly complex. So I've been doing it for a very, very long time, and there are still things that I am learning every week that are new or surprising, or there's different rules and regulations to follow up on. So if even I am having to, continually learn, we don't expect our clients to be the experts on these kinds of things. If you've ever looked at a credit card statement and seen everything kind of itemized out, it's incredibly complex. It's incredibly difficult to understand, but that's what we're here for. We're the ones who are here to understand what those are and to be able to explain them to you. So today we're going to talk about just some high-level concepts of credit card fees and how they apply for you specifically in your line of business. And we're going to start out with what the different kinds of fees are and where they're going to. Then we're going to talk about different ways those fees can be charged. And then, of course, there's a time for questions as well at the end if you don't feel like interjecting during the chat. So I'm going to start today by talking about the basics of credit card fees. So to process credit cards, there's costs involved, obviously. So those costs get broken down into 3 main categories. The first one is the category that we refer to as interchange. Interchange fees are the fees set by the card issuing banks that get paid back to the card issuing banks. So wherever your cardholder has a card from, the bank that issued that card to that cardholder then gets a percentage of the fees when that card is charged. So that's your biggest one, is interchange. The second category is the card brand fees or the card network fees. And these are the fees that get paid back to the card brands. So think Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex. They take a very small percentage in all things considering, but they still get paid a percentage of the fees that get charged every time their cards are used. So your first one is interchange, that gets paid back to the card issuing banks. And the second is the card brand fees, which gets paid back to the card networks for having the cards out in the world. The third set of fees is our processor fees. As a processor, we monitor your transactions for you. We help get you set up with the ability to run those transactions. If you have an issue with one of your transactions that goes through, we don't expect you to call the card issuing bank, for example. We don't expect you to call Chase or Wells Fargo or figure out what is wrong with the card from that transaction point of view. We also don't expect you to call Visa directly and figure out what happened there. That's our job. We expect you to call us, and then we will figure out what is going on and make sure that you can get paid at the end of the day. So those are some of the services that we provide. We also have incredible on-call support. We have incredible reporting. All of those things that we do as a service for you, there is a charge involved with that as well. So all of those things put together, those are what make up the different fees that we need to charge in order to pay for credit card processing. Again, a big portion of that we pass back to the card issuing banks. That's your interchange. We also pass back the card network fees back to the card brands. And then we also have to keep our costs in consideration as well for the services that we provide. So we also have some processor costs involved. So those are the 3 main categories. Hi, Emery. I think you're muted.
Hello, I have a question.
Great.
For the folks on the line, if they're thinking about, and maybe you're going to get to this, but of those 3 amounts, can you talk about sort of like, I know they would vary, they do vary, but if you're thinking about like the total fees that a law firm is paying, what percentage of the total fees, would typically go to those kind of three, it would fit into those three categories. And then, is there opportunity to kind of like negotiate or save in any of those three categories? So
Yeah, those are great questions.
And if you're going to cover that later, feel free to ignore it.
No, that's a perfect segue. We can talk about that now for sure. So if we're thinking about those three different categories, the main chunk of fees that you're going to end up paying goes back to interchange. That accounts for 70 to 80% of the total fees that you end up getting assessed for processing credit cards. So 70 to 80% of your fees get paid back to the card issuing banks for the rates that they have set. We don't have control over those rates. Those rates should be static. They should be the same across the board, whether you're processing with Gravity or you're processing with somebody else. We don't get to say, hey, for this particular card, we want to charge this amount of interchange. We don't have the ability to do that. Those rates are set by the banks, and it is the majority of what you end up paying. The card brand fees make up between 10 and 15% of your fees, and then the processor fees can be anywhere for us of 5 to 10% of your total fees that are being charged. It's a very, very small percentage, especially compared to the interchange that gets charged. So the interchange and the card brand fees, those are the ones, again, that are static. It doesn't matter who you're processing with. Those are established rates. You can actually search and find what all of those rates are listed through the regulated sites. So Visa has posted all of their different interchange rates. They have posted all of their different network fees, for example. So it shouldn't matter who you're processing with in order to be charged those rates. That said, Gravity does not do this, but it is a very common practice for many other processors to take the listed rates from Visa, MasterCard, Discover, etc., for the interchange, for the card brand fees, and add markup on top of that, but still call it the listed rates. So they will say, for example, here's a Visa rewards to interchange rate. So that's a very common card type, of Visa rewards to, and the rate for that card, for example, is 1.95%. But another processor might say, hey, for your Visa Rewards 2 card, we actually are going to charge 2.5%. And if you, as the merchant, as our client, if you don't know that the true rate for that card is 1.95%, you're going to be paying extra that processor is then going to be pocketing simply because you don't necessarily know the difference. And that's really shady. And that's something that we are adamantly against and we will not do, because transparency is extremely important in how we present you with your credit card fees. So that's something that I take a lot of time looking into. When I look at credit card statements, I make sure that when a processor says, here's your interchange cost, that it actually matches up with what the true interchange is, and they're not making any additional on top of that in kind of a sneaky way. Emery, does that answer your question? Does that kind of cover that, or did I miss something?
Yep. No, that was great. Thanks, Ashley.
Perfect. Cool. So yeah, again, keeping in mind the interchange, the fees that the banks get just for giving out the credit cards and for having their card holders use those in the economy. They're the ones who have the majority of the fees that get paid back for your credit card processing. We can always go back to interchange and costs and how that kind of breaks out. I know that's a lot of information. If you want some time to think about it, and if you have questions that pop up about it later, feel free to drop them in the chat. Emery can definitely interrupt me again. More than welcome to do so. I do want to talk a little bit about pricing structures though, and how we at Gravity Legal set up you to be charged for your credit card fees compared to how some of the other processors might do so. So when we talk about how you can be charged your fees, there are, again, 3 different very common methodologies for how your fees can be set up to be charged. So we're going to talk about all 3 today. The first one is called cost plus. The second is flat rate, and the third is tiered. So those are the 3 different ways that you can be set up to have your credit card fees charged every month. So cost plus, flat rate, and tiered. I'm going to start with cost plus. Cost plus is exactly what it sounds like, where on your credit card statement, you get charged the cost from the banks, you get charged the cost from the card brand networks, itemized in multiple pages. Typically, every single line item says the fee that's being charged and the amount and where it's going, plus the fees that your processor is charging for the services that they provide. So that's where cost plus, or some places call it interchange plus, comes from, where everything gets passed through and you can see it itemized one for one on your statement. This is really helpful if you want to have all of the details of exactly what you're paying every single month itemized and ready for you to look at. Some of the cons of that, though, is it's incredibly complex and it can be difficult to understand the statement and what you're reading. Typically, for legal accounts, we have found that a more simplistic approach seems to work better, because with a cost plus structure, if your fees fluctuate with interchange, for example, so say one month you have a lot of debit cards that come through your account, and the next month you have a lot of credit cards come through your account. Both of those different kinds of cards have very different rates, which means you will be paying different percentages each month based on the kinds of cards that come through your account. With a flat rate, we can simplify that and we can say, based on how you typically run your cards, we can say, here is one simple flat rate of whatever percent, and we look at this individually on each account. And we say, you're going to pay us, as an example, this is not byline or anything, but as an example, you are going to pay 3% every month. And then we are going to take that and we are going to account for the interchange, we are going to account for the card brand fees, and we are going to account for the processor fees within that same 3% every single month. So your rates aren't going to fluctuate. They're not going to go up or down. It's very consistent, and you know exactly what you can expect to pay for your credit card fees at the end of the month. It's very, very simple. And then again, we do the back work to make sure that those fees get separated out and paid to interchange, to card brand fees, and to cover our processing costs as well. So again, you have cost plus, where everything is itemized and your rates every month from interchange and the network fees will fluctuate. Gravity's fees will not fluctuate. The rates will not go up or down on a cost plus structure. We set our rates as they are. Perhaps it's 0.5% of your volume, whatever that is, that's going to be our processor fee, for example. That won't go up or down every month, but your interchange and your network fees might, based on the cards that come through. With a flat rate, however, it's very simple. You know exactly what you can expect to pay every single month. I know that was also a lot. So if there are questions, I'll give you some time to think about that and possibly pop in. I get really excited about this stuff, and so I can start to get going. And I forget sometimes that it can take a little bit to process.
Actually, I'll jump in with a kind of a question, or maybe just kind of try to reiterate one of the, kind of what you were talking about between these two, and feel free to correct or comment. But it sounds like so kind of what you're, two options plus. You get all the different kind of 3-letter acronym fees coming through, and there's a lot of complexity. But it also kind of reduces the risk from the processor standpoint. So it allows them to charge a little bit less. So if you're negotiating on behalf of your law firm client and want to get them, the very best possible rate, and don't necessarily care as much about, simplicity, kind of going more for that like cost plus model would be probably the best bet. And then, if for clients who maybe value simplicity, consistency, that type of thing, trying to go more in kind of like the flat rate direction might be the best route. So
Absolutely.
is that kind of what
Yes.
so
Yes, absolutely. With a flat rate, like you were saying, us as the processor, we have to account for a little bit more risk on our side because we can't predict every month the kind of cards that are going to come through your business. So we can't say with pinpoint accuracy, I know your costs are going to be X, so I can charge you Y and I can absolutely cover that. We have to add a little bit of buffer there because those rates do fluctuate, and we need to make sure that we are collecting enough to account for the costs on the inside. So it's incredibly simple on your part, but it does require us to maybe price a little higher than we would need to on a cost plus model, for example, like Emery was saying. Because with a cost plus example, if your costs fluctuate, then you pay the difference automatically. And so we can reduce those rates quite a bit because that's automatically just going to get passed through to you to pay every month instead of us having to account for it with the rate that we've preset.
perfect. Thanks, Ashley.
Cool. So I know that it is extremely common in the legal environment for processors to charge tiered rates. So we've covered cost plus, we've talked briefly about flat rates. The third way that you can get set up for credit card processing is through a tier system. And when I say third, it is a third way, but it has a whole spectrum of different possibilities for how processors can set up tiered rates. There's no one size fits all. We at Gravity do not do tiered rates because this is, in my experience in the payment industry, this is one of the single most predatory practices from credit card processors that there is out there. The idea behind tiered, the basics of tiered is sounds really simple. They say, for example, we're going to take every single kind of card you could possibly run, and we're going to bucket them into really simple buckets for you to understand. So we will say you have a qualified card bucket, and any cards that fit within that qualified bucket will get a rate of 1.25%. That's just an example. Okay, so you have your qualified cards get one rate, and then they'll say you have mid-qualified cards, they'll get charged another rate. Maybe that's 2%. And then everything else that we count as not qualified will get yet another rate. Maybe that's even 3%. So now you have your buckets of rates. You have your really low one for your qualified, your slightly higher for your mid-qualified, and then you have the highest one for your non-qualified rates. The problem is there is no transparency as to what kind of cards fall into each bucket, and that goes processor to processor. So one processor can set up the exact same rates, but put very different cards in each bucket. And not only does it vary processor to processor, it can vary client to client for each processor. So if I'm a processor, I can take client A and client B and set them up with the same rates, but put different cards into different buckets for each account. There's no regulations around that. It's completely legal. It's wild to me, but it makes it incredibly difficult to understand or predict where your fees are going to go. The other caveats with that is those buckets are only meant to cover the interchange cost. So when you get your statement at the end of the month, if you were on a tiered structure, you might get charged qualified rate, mid-qualified rate, non-qualified rate, and then you will also be charged your card brand fees on top of that. And then the processor might add additional fees for themselves on top of that as well. So when you get your bid, or when you look at advertisements, for example, that advertise these incredibly low rates, they're not transparent because they don't tell you everything that's going to be charged. I've seen a few where if you go online, it will say like 1.25%. And that's in bold letters right across the top of the screen. That looks great. A 1.25%, that's amazing. I don't know anybody who has a rate that is that low at all, but that's what it looks like. And then there's an asterisk. And then in the asterisk, there's fine print that says for qualified cards only. And then there's another asterisk and it says all of the additional fees that could possibly be charged. And it does not tell you the rates that they are going to charge for their mid-qualified or their non-qualified cards. So tiered rates are meant to look extremely attractive because they sell an extremely low rate right up front. And then they add on all of these other fees because that's just how the structure works. But if you're not aware of that, you can end up paying significantly more than you thought you were just because you maybe thought you were just being charged that one low qualified rate. One of the worst statements I have ever seen, the client ended up paying about 7%. 7% of their monthly processing volume was paid to this processor in credit card fees. 7% is outrageous. Like that's double, triple sometimes the average of what our accounts pay with us. 7% is insane. And that was because of how the tiers were set up. And it looked like they had a really low qualified rate. But then when you looked at all of the other things that the processor was adding on, it was theft. It was absolutely ludicrous. It still makes me angry. I was telling Emery earlier, when I start talking about tiered pricing, I can get a little ranty because it makes me really angry. Because if you don't understand exactly how the process works, and if you don't understand what you're looking at or what you're signing, you can end up agreeing to this contract where you're paying way more than you need to, and it's really difficult to get out of. And that kind of thing where processors are taking advantage of small businesses, that makes me so livid, absolutely livid. So here at Gravity Payments, we do not sell a tiered pricing structure. We just don't do it anymore because it doesn't make sense and we don't want to be predatory. That's against everything about who we are in regarding transparency and looking out for the little guy, little gal and their business opportunities.
Well, I have just a question to interject. I know we only have a few minutes left, but putting yourself in the shoes of a consultant, someone who's working on behalf of a law firm to to help reduce some of the financial roadblocks that firm is facing. Looking at accepting payments kind of as a whole. I think you've alluded to many kind of tricks and tips throughout this throughout the webinar, but can you talk about sort of what would be your kind of 2 or 3 things that you would do to help these if you're advising these law firms?
Absolutely. My number one recommendation, and this goes for anyone who's accepting credit card fees, is the rule of thumb for credit card fees typically is the more information you provide during the time of sale, during the transaction, the lower the risk there ends up being for fraud or chargeback or things like that. So anytime there's an opportunity to add things like AVS or a zip code or any other required information, the more information you provide, the less risk that transaction will have. And when that risk is less, then the cost ends up being less to interchange, for example, because the banks see a lower risk and they reward that with a slightly lower rate sometimes. Kind of depends on the card, and it's extremely complicated. But anytime you can add additional information at the time of sale, it's extremely helpful. The other thing, which might seem a little counterintuitive for credit card processors, but if you have extremely large transactions, your best bet is really to use an ACH feature. The risk is going to be lower and the costs are going to be lower for you as well. It may not be as convenient, which is why we want to offer you a really simple solution for accepting credit card payments. But if you're looking to reduce your fees, especially for those very, very, very large transactions, and you want to reduce risk as well, ACH is a better option typically for those very large transactions.
Cool. Thank you, Ashley. So I think we're kind of winding down here. Any before we kind of say goodbye, anything else? Any parting words?
We have lots of resources available. If you have questions, I love helping. I love helping explain things. There's a lot of things available online. I've posted a few other webinars and some blog posts that kind of detail these more in depth. So if you want more information, or if you have kind of those nerdy financial questions that we didn't have time for today, that you want to know more about, let us know. Emery's here, I'm here. We have whole teams available to help you, because we don't want your payment processing to be another, headache. Running a business is difficult enough. And if we can simplify this, and if we can help answer your questions and help you understand this, then we've done our job.
Well, thanks a lot, Ashley. I put my contact info in the chat. So if you have questions, and if I can't answer, I'll go to the expert here. Yeah, again, I want to thank Lean Law for helping produce this. As I said, we have a new integration where you can accept trust deposit requests directly from Lean Law, by connecting your Gravity Legal account there. So big thanks to them. I also put the Financially Legal homepage link there. Again, you can find financial calculators, information, and podcast episodes on all the nerdy aspects of the financial side of the business of law, which we think about every day, and I know many of you do as well. So thank you all for attending. Thanks, Ashley, and we will send out a recording by email once it's ready.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.